Adored her. Whatever Renee wanted, Chris would give it to her.
A seemingly happy marriage, a respected couple, known for their warmth, their faith, and their family. And then, one evening in March of 2025, everything shattered in a way no one could have imagined. This is the story of Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh, a 54-year-old fashion vlogger, hairstylist, and church secretary. To those who knew her, she was radiant. She was the kind of woman whose laughter filled family gatherings, whose creativity made every holiday a celebration, and whose presence brought light into every room she entered. For more than 20 years, she was married to Christopher "Chris" Pugh, a 53-year-old man seen as her steady partner in life. Together, they seemed inseparable, their bond admired by neighbors, friends, and their church community. But on the night of March 22, 2025, something unimaginable unfolded inside the walls of their Garner, North Carolina home. It began with a single call to 911, a call that lasted only seconds before the line went dead. When dispatchers immediately dialed back, Chris answered the phone. He calmly explained that no one had called, that everything was fine. But in the background of that call, something chilling was heard. It was the voice of Teresa, desperate, pleading for help. Deputies rushed to the residence. As they surrounded the house, gunshots echoed from inside. For hours, law enforcement tried to make contact, tried to end the standoff without more loss. But silence replaced the chaos, and when they finally entered with a warrant just before 11 that night, the truth came into focus. Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh was gone. She had been shot and killed, and next to her lay her husband Chris, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The tragedy was ruled a murder-suicide, a conclusion that left their family, their friends, and their entire community reeling in shock. How could this happen to a couple who seemed so devoted? How could such darkness unfold in a home where love and laughter once flourished? And how do we make sense of the desperate cries on that 911 call, the final moments of a woman who should have been safe with the man she trusted most? In this episode, we will carefully retrace the lives of Teresa and Chris Pugh. We will look at who they were, what led to that devastating night, and what unanswered questions remain. We will also explore the impact this case left behind, not only on their family, but on a community struggling to understand how hidden struggles can end in such irreversible tragedy. This is not just the story of one family. It is a story that raises difficult questions about relationships, about warning signs that often go unseen, and about the silent battles many carry behind closed doors. If you are drawn to true crime stories told with depth, care, and respect, we invite you to stay with us as we uncover the heartbreaking story of Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh. And if you have not already, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our in-depth documentaries. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in March of 2025, we must first understand who Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh was and the life she had built with Christopher Pugh. Teresa was more than just a name in the news. She was a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, and a beloved figure in her community. At 54 years old, she had created a life defined by passion and devotion. She worked as a hairstylist, where clients admired not only her skill, but also the warmth she brought into every appointment. She carried that same energy into her online presence as a fashion vlogger, sharing her love of style, beauty, and confidence with a growing audience. Yet, those who knew her best often spoke not just of her creativity, but of her heart. She had a way of making people feel seen, welcomed, and cherished. Her family described her as the soul of every gathering. During holidays, Teresa's home transformed into a space of joy and celebration, filled with decorations she carefully placed, laughter that echoed through the rooms, and food that brought everyone together. She found joy in the details, the sparkle of Christmas lights, the warmth of a Thanksgiving meal, the traditions that gave her loved ones memories they would carry forever. To her children and grandchildren, she was a constant source of comfort and encouragement, someone who showed them what it meant to love fully and unconditionally. At her side was Christopher Pugh, known to most as Chris. At 53 years old, he had been her husband for more than 2 decades. To neighbors, they were a couple who represented stability. They attended church, greeted those around them with kindness, and seemed to embody the quiet strength of a long-standing marriage. Chris was often described as calm, steady, and dependable. Together, they gave the impression of a partnership rooted in loyalty, faith, and mutual respect. Garner, North Carolina, the town they called home, is a place defined by family values and a sense of community. It is a suburban setting just outside of Raleigh, where neighbors look out for one another and where church plays a central role in many lives. In a place like this, people believed they knew one another. They believed they could see if something was wrong. And when it came to the Pughs, there were no outward signs of danger, no warnings that their marriage was troubled, no reason to think tragedy was approaching. Friends of the couple echoed the same sentiment. Teresa was described as vibrant, fun-loving, stylish, and full of energy. Chris was seen as supportive and dedicated. Together, they were remembered as family-oriented and deeply connected to their loved ones. It was this image, the image of a couple admired, trusted, and respected, that made what happened on March 22, 2025, so difficult to comprehend. Because behind closed doors, in the privacy of their own home, something far different was unfolding. Something that would leave an entire community questioning how such darkness could exist in the life of a couple who seemed to have it all. March 22, 2025 began like any other day in Garner, North Carolina. The town moved through its usual rhythm. Families prepared dinners, children played outside, and neighbors settled in for the evening. For Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh and her husband, Christopher Pugh, there were no outward signs that the night would end in tragedy. At 6:45 p.m., a call was placed to 911 from the Pugh residence. It lasted only seconds. Then the line went silent. To a dispatcher, a disconnected call might be the result of an accident, a wrong number, or a technical glitch. But by protocol, every call must be taken seriously. The number was immediately dialed back. On the other end of the line, Christopher Pugh answered. His voice was steady. He told the dispatcher that no one had called, that everything was fine. But the silence that followed revealed more than his words. In the background, another sound cut through, the voice of Teresa. She was not calm. She was not safe. She was crying out, pleading for help. The chilling reality was clear to the dispatcher. This was not a mistake. Something was happening inside that house. Deputies were dispatched to the Pugh residence. As patrol cars pulled onto the quiet suburban street, the flashing lights broke through the calm of the neighborhood. Officers took positions around the home. From outside, they could hear it. Gunshots fired from within. The sound confirmed their worst fears. What followed was a tense and painful standoff. For hours, law enforcement attempted to make contact. They called out. They tried to reach Chris by phone. They worked carefully, methodically, hoping for a resolution that would spare lives. Family members, hearing what was happening, rushed to the scene. Neighbors stood by in disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of the friendly couple they knew with the violence unfolding behind closed doors. Inside, the house was silent. No one answered. No one came to the door. Time moved slowly. Each passing hour deepened the dread. Then, just before 11 p.m., with a warrant secured, officers entered the home. The scene inside was devastating. Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh lay dead, shot by the man she had trusted for more than 2 decades. Beside her was Christopher Pugh, who had turned the gun on himself. What began as a desperate call for help had ended in a murder-suicide. The weight of the discovery rippled immediately through the responders on scene. Even seasoned law enforcement officers struggled with the tragedy. It was not only the loss of 2 lives, it was the shattering of a family, the breaking of a community, and the silencing of a woman whose final words had been cries for help. News of the incident spread quickly. By the next morning, headlines across North Carolina carried the story. A respected couple, a seemingly stable marriage, and a violent end that no one had seen coming. For friends and family, the reality was almost impossible to accept. For the community of Garner, the question lingered, how could something like this happen in a home that, from the outside, had appeared so full of love. When law enforcement confirmed that both Teresa and Christopher Pugh were dead, the house on that quiet street in Ghana transformed from a family home into a crime scene. Investigators moved carefully through the rooms, documenting every detail, searching for answers to the question on everyone's mind. Why had this happened? The evidence told a grim but direct story. Teresa had been fatally shot. Nearby lay Christopher, the weapon still in the home, his own life taken shortly after hers. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle that suggested an outsider. Nothing pointed to anyone else being involved. From the very beginning, the conclusion became clear. This was not a double homicide committed by an unknown intruder. It was a murder-suicide. But understanding the mechanics of what happened was only the beginning. For detectives, the greater challenge lay in uncovering the motive. Family members were interviewed, many still in shock from what had taken place just hours earlier. They described Teresa as vibrant, deeply loved and full of energy. They spoke of Chris as a man who had shown no outward signs of violence, no public displays of rage. The relationship, they said, appeared stable. There had been no warnings, no visible cracks in the foundation of their marriage that would lead anyone to believe it could end this way. Neighbors echoed these statements. They remembered the couple as friendly, approachable, and committed to family life. No late-night arguments heard through the walls, no police cars previously parked outside their home, no visible turbulence. To those on the outside, theirs was a household of stability. Yet the 911 call stood as the clearest piece of evidence that behind closed doors, something had gone terribly wrong. Investigators analyzed the recording in detail. The dispatcher's log noted that Chris had insisted no one had called, but the voice in the background was unmistakably Teresa's, urgent, distressed, pleading for help. That brief audio became the haunting confirmation of her final moments. The firearm raised further questions. Family members expressed disbelief that Chris even owned a gun. There had been no conversations about weapons, no outward indication that one was kept in the home. Investigators traced its origin, confirming it was legally possessed. Still, for those who loved Teresa, the very presence of the weapon felt like a betrayal, an unseen danger that had been hidden until it was too late. As news spread, the Ghana community responded with vigils and gatherings. Law enforcement officials spoke carefully, sharing verified facts while acknowledging the pain that weighed heavily over the town. For them, the case was straightforward in its conclusion. Chris had killed his wife and then himself. But for the family, for friends, and for neighbors, the questions remained far from answered. Why did Chris take such an irreversible step? Was there an unspoken struggle, a private despair, or a hidden conflict? Or had the marriage carried silent tensions that no one outside the home could ever see? The investigation provided facts, but facts alone could not explain the devastation left behind. When news of the deaths of Teresa and Christopher Pugh spread across Ghana, North Carolina, the community was stunned. The following morning, headlines across the state described the incident as a murder-suicide, words that felt unthinkable when connected to a couple so deeply respected. In a town where neighbors prided themselves on knowing one another, on recognizing when someone was in need, the revelation struck with a force that many compared to a sudden storm. No one had seen this coming. Local media stations carried the story almost immediately. Reports emphasized Teresa's role as a hairstylist, a fashion vlogger, and a devoted church secretary. They highlighted her reputation as a woman whose laughter and warmth brought joy to everyone around her. Her photographs appeared on the evening news, smiling, stylish, radiant. Each image made the tragedy feel more personal to those who watched. Christopher's name was included as well, though his portrayal carried a tone of disbelief. To most who knew him, he was steady, dependable, and family-oriented. Now, he was identified as the man who had taken Teresa's life before ending his own. For friends and neighbors, it was nearly impossible to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the crime he had committed. At Teresa's church, the news hit especially hard. She had been a constant presence, not just as secretary but as someone who offered comfort and encouragement to others. The following Sunday, the sanctuary was filled with mourners. Candles were lit in her memory, hymns were sung through tears, and prayers were offered for the family she left behind. Parishioners spoke about her warmth, about her passion for decorating during holidays, and about the way she always lifted the spirits of those around her. In interviews, family members expressed a deep sense of disbelief. They had not known of any struggles that could have led to this. They said there had been no warnings, no signs that Chris was capable of such violence. To them, the tragedy was not only devastating, it was incomprehensible. As the days passed, the story gained traction beyond Ghana. Regional news outlets and online platforms began discussing the case, not only as a shocking local event, but as part of a broader conversation. Commentators raised questions about hidden struggles in marriages, about the role of mental health in tragedies like this, and about the presence of firearms in homes where conflict might exist quietly, unnoticed. For the Ghana community, however, the discussion was more personal. It was not about theories or debates. It was about the loss of Teresa, the pain of her children and grandchildren, and the emptiness left behind by a woman who had once been the center of family gatherings. It was about trying to understand how a couple so admired could meet such an end. In the weeks that followed, vigils were held. Friends wore colors that Teresa loved, shared stories of her laughter, and vowed to keep her memory alive. Yet even in remembrance, the shadow of the unanswered question lingered. What truly happened inside that home on the night Teresa's voice was heard pleading for help? In the aftermath of the tragedy, Ghana, North Carolina, became a town suspended between grief and disbelief. The murder-suicide of Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh and Christopher Pugh was not just another news story, it was a wound that touched neighbors, friends, and an entire community who struggled to make sense of what had happened. For Teresa's family, the days that followed were filled with heartbreak. Her children and grandchildren faced the unthinkable reality that the woman who had anchored their lives with joy, laughter, and love was gone. Every holiday, every family gathering, every tradition they once shared now carried the shadow of absence. Friends spoke of her empty chair at church services, the silence where her laughter once filled the room, and the memories of holidays she had made so bright. Community leaders addressed the tragedy in town meetings and church gatherings. Pastors spoke about the fragility of life and the hidden struggles people carry. Counselors volunteered to help grieving families and neighbors. Support groups formed quietly, offering spaces for those left behind to share their pain. The tragedy had shaken the community to its core, leaving many to question how such devastation could exist behind the closed doors of a home that once seemed ordinary, even admirable. But along with mourning came the search for answers. Why had Christopher Pugh done this? What had led to such an irreversible act? Some believed the tragedy could be traced to unspoken struggles with mental health. In cases of murder-suicide, experts often point to untreated depression, feelings of hopelessness or distorted thinking. Perhaps, they speculated, Chris had been suffering in silence, carrying burdens that no one else could see. Others wondered if there had been private tensions in the marriage that family and friends were unaware of. It is not uncommon, they said, for couples to hide conflicts from the public eye, maintaining an image of harmony while struggling behind closed doors. Could Teresa's desperate cries on the 911 call have been the eruption of a conflict long kept hidden? There were also those who questioned whether sudden stressors had played a role. Financial strain, health problems, or personal crises have been known to trigger acts of violence in households that appear stable from the outside. Investigators did not disclose any confirmed motive, leaving room for speculation. Still, no theory provided full closure. For the people who knew Teresa and Chris, the explanations felt incomplete. No amount of psychological analysis or social commentary could erase the memory of that desperate 911 call, the gunshots heard by deputies, or the devastating discovery inside the Pugh home. The case left the community with haunting questions. How many other families might be facing struggles no one sees? How often do cries for help go unheard until it is too late? And what more can be done to prevent tragedies like this from unfolding again? In the end, Teresa was remembered not for the way she died, but for the way she lived, with style, with love, and with a spirit that continues to echo through those who carry her memory. The story of Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh and Christopher Pugh does not end with the closing of a police investigation or the final notes of a news report. Instead, it lingers in memories, in conversations, and in the quiet moments when family, friends, and neighbors are left to reflect on what was lost and what it all means. For those who knew Teresa, her absence is felt most sharply in the places she once filled with warmth and presence. Her church pew remains empty, a silent reminder of her devotion to faith and community. At family gatherings, her laughter is missing, replaced by the hollow recognition that the traditions she built must now continue without her. She is remembered as a woman of style, kindness, and strength, a mother and grandmother who poured her heart into those she loved. Christopher, too, is remembered, but with questions rather than certainty. How could a man once seen as a devoted husband and respected figure in his community commit such an irreversible act? Was it a moment of despair, a hidden conflict that reached its breaking point, or was it something darker, something no one saw until it was too late? These questions remain unanswered and unsettling. The tragedy left a mark not only on a family, but on an entire town. Neighbors who once waved to the Pughs in passing now recall the sound of sirens that night, the flashing lights, the news that followed. For many, it was a reminder that appearances can conceal realities no one suspects. A marriage may look stable, a household may seem ordinary, but behind closed doors, struggles can unfold in silence until they erupt in tragedy. Counselors and community leaders urged conversations about mental health, domestic conflict, and the importance of reaching out for help. It was not enough to simply mourn. The tragedy called for reflection on the hidden battles people face, on the need for compassion, and on the reality that silence can be deadly. Families were encouraged to check on one another, to notice the small signs of distress, and to never dismiss the possibility that someone might be suffering beneath the surface. For law enforcement and first responders, the memory of that night remained vivid. The 911 call, the desperate voice of Teresa crying out for help, the gunshots that followed before deputies could reach the door, and the grim discovery inside. These were not just details in a case file. They were moments that left a lasting impact, reminders of the urgency of their work and the fragility of life. In the end, the story of Teresa and Christopher Pugh is not one that can be neatly resolved. It is a story of love, of community, of hidden struggles, and of devastating choices. It is a story that forces us to ask difficult questions about the people around us, about the relationships we assume we understand, and about the importance of listening when someone reaches out for help. As we close this chapter, we remember Teresa Rene Adams-Pugh for the light she brought into the lives of those who knew her. We acknowledge the pain left behind, and we carry forward the reminder that behind every door, every smile, and every family, there may be a story unseen. This is more than a case. It is a human story, one that leaves us with lessons, with grief, and with the enduring responsibility to look closer, listen deeper, and care more fiercely for the lives intertwined with our own.